Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery. Today we are talking about cold calling for real estate agents. Specifically, we're going to talk about who do you call? How do you go about doing it? What's the best time to call? We're going to learn all about these techniques in this episode. Stick around to learn more. So when we're talking about cold calling for real estate agents, what exactly are we talking about? Well, we need a definition. This is not just opening up a phone book or finding random numbers and calling them. That is not what our cold calling strategy is about. However, it's not to say that doesn't work. The argument is it's just not necessarily worth your time. If you do just want to call random numbers or go through a phone book, that's fine. But what I would recommend is hire a freelancer to potentially do that for you. Have them go through the list of numbers or go through a phone book, and if they find somebody with at least a little bit of intent, doesn't have to be somebody who you can close, but just somebody with a little bit of intent, then you can ask them to do the handoff and you can call them using cold calling techniques at that point in time. What we're talking about though, you can choose that technique. What we are talking about though are people that have registered on your website, or people that you have gotten from a lead generation website, or for sale by owners, expireds. These are all included when we're talking about cold calling for real estate agents. Another type of cold calling, we call this big fish, and everybody should have 25 big fish accounts in their database at all times. Let me explain. Big fish are companies or individuals that can offer you a lot of business over time. This is oftentimes overlooked by real estate agents. So an example would be builders or banks that can offer you foreclosures, or foreclosure lawyers, investors, home flippers. These are all people or companies that can offer you a lot of business over time. They're also not companies or people that are just going to use you as soon as you call. So you have to work with them over time. And that should be part of your cold calling strategy as well. You should have 25 of these. And whatever you do, don't think that you're going to call your big fish once and they're going to convert. This is a long process. It can take months, if not years, in order to convert some of these. But you always want to have 25 that you are currently working in your database. So that's another form of cold calling that you can use. Next, let's talk about the magic in cold calling. So cold calling can work. The thing is the conversion rate's quite low. Studies show that it's around 2%. So what can you do in order to increase that? Well, the magic is follow-up. So there's always something that you can do in order to follow up with these people. Unless they tell me that they are completely not interested, take me off your list, don't ever call me again, I will still continue to follow up with them. In fact, another study shows that prospects want to be followed up with during cold calls 2 to 4 times. So there's actually a game of chase here. They want you to reach out 2 to 4 times before actually giving up. And here's the thing, is most prospects will say no around 4 times before they actually convert. Now here's the thing, over half of agents will only call once. So prospects want to be called between 2 and 4 times, and it requires typically 4 calls before you get a yes, yet real estate agents, over half of them, won't follow up more than once, or they won't make more than 1 call. So there is a huge opportunity for anybody willing to follow up using cold calling techniques. So how about how long and when should I make these calls? Well, if you wanted to break it down to the science, the best time to cold call is between 11 a.m. and 12 or between 4 and 5. So these are the times when people are typically winding down, so either they're getting ready for lunch or they're getting ready to finish their day, but they're not actually done yet. So this is an opportune time to call them. So 11 a.m. to 12 or 4 to 5. Now what day? Well, again, if you want to make a science out of it, the best days are Wednesdays and Thursdays. Reason being, early in the week, Monday, Tuesday, people are kind of getting back in the swing of things. Friday, they're already shutting it down. Therefore, Monday and Thursday are your top days. Now, all of that being said, the best time to cold call is when you actually do it. So if the best time for you to cold call is 9 to 10 a.m. on Mondays, yeah, your results might be a little bit less, but done is better than perfect. So still go ahead and cold call at that time if that's the time that will work for you. And how long should we make these calls for? Well, studies show the best cold calls are between 5 and 6 minutes. Those that are not as successful are less than about 4 minutes. So the magic zone is that 5 to 6 minutes. Once it gets longer than that, it doesn't tend to be overly successful. That's the magic zone. And how much should you talk? Well, you should talk about 60% of the time. So if you're used to discovery and pulling questions out of people, that's going to feel like you're talking more. And that's true. During a cold call, it's okay for you to talk more than your client or your customer or your prospect. During this cold call, what you're doing is you're trying to sell them on the value. You're trying to sell them on the next step. And so at this point in time, you don't have to close them. And actually, it's not recommended to get into discovery. Once you start doing discovery, you start trying to get information from them, what their buying criteria is, it just frustrates them. Everyone is short on time. Get right to the point, ask what you want to ask. And then if there's a little back and forth, then definitely entertain it. Next, how do we get over call reluctance when it comes to cold calling? This happens to everybody. You're sitting there, you're in front of your computer screen, you have your phone, and you're shaky. You don't really know where to start. Well, there's a few things that you can do in order to trick your mind into start calling. First off, and this is the best strategy that I have ever seen, and it is using what we call assigning a value. So take, for instance, that it takes 150 calls for you to secure a meeting. And let's say that every 3 meetings with different people, one of those will turn into a client. And then let's say that your average commission is $8,000 in your city. Well, if that's the case, then each of those cold calls is worth $32 to you. So just because they say no, that's perfectly fine. That's still $32 in your pocket. What I find is most cold calls are between about $25 to $90 in real estate. That depends on what you're cold calling, so if your price point is higher, if your commissions are at a certain rate, and then also if we're talking about big fish, they will be a bigger number. However, it will take more following up to get there. So know your number. If you don't know where to start, recommend starting at around that $32, or even if you want to push it up a little bit, $50, and write that number down and put it on your computer screen for when you are doing your cold calls. Next, let's talk about your environment. So setting yourself up for success. The first thing you need to do is you need to be standing when you are making cold calls. You do not want to be slumped over. You do not want to be sitting. You need to be standing. That's going to improve your tone. You're going to come across a lot more confident. Not only are you going to come across more confident, you'll actually have more blood flow, more ideas will come to you, and you'll actually be more confident. You'll actually be able to have a more productive phone conversation with a potential client. So stand up. Next, before you get started, make sure you're listening to some motivational music or a few videos. This will get things going. This will get the blood pumping as well. You'll get pumped up, you'll be ready for your calls. Whatever you do is don't just jump into this slumping down without actually getting motivated. Next is essential oils. So they can be great to get you energized and get you ready to go for your calls. I recommend using peppermint. It's invigorating. Have it going at your desk or in your office while you're making your calls. It does make a difference. Finally, to set yourself up in the right frame of mind for making these cold calls, what you want to do is you want to picture the person on the other line as your best friend. So by mentally picturing that you're picking up the phone and you're calling your best friend, it will cause this little tweak in your mind and you are going to act more friendly. You're going to easily build rapport. So make sure that you're making this call and you're thinking, that's my best friend on the other line. It makes a huge difference. Next, let's talk about some rules. So whatever you do, first off, don't wing it. Use a script. You can use our script. We'll link it up in the description below. You can go and check out our script. Feel free to use it. Use any script. Whatever you do, just make sure that you're following a plan. And that way you can learn, you can iterate. Depending on how they respond, you can iterate. Which brings me to my next point, is record your calls. When you think back to your call, you're going to think back with a level of bias. Make sure that you're recording your calls so you can go back, you can analyze, hey, how did that word work? How did they respond? This goes a very, very long way. So make sure you're recording your calls. Next is understand the goal of the cold call. So a lot of times people jump into cold calls, what they're trying to do is get a listing or something like that. Instead of that, just be focused on advancing the deal. So what do I mean by that? Advancing the deal simply means that there is something productive coming out of this. There is a goal to get you to the next step. So if it is a completely cold for sale by owner, what you're after is probably a short meeting. If it's an expired, it's a short meeting. Same thing if you have a big fish. What you're after is potentially just a short Zoom meeting, just to learn more about what they're looking for. If you have a buyer that registered on your site, potentially what you're trying to set up is another Zoom meeting for a buyer presentation, or you're trying to set up a quick 10-minute coffee so you can learn a little bit more about what they're looking for. So know what your goal is, and your goal is never to close. Your goal is just simply to advance the deal, to advance the person through the pipeline. And at the cold stage, all you're trying to do is then move them towards a prospect. At that point in time, you can then qualify them and start discovery and figure out what it is that they're looking for. But make sure that you know your goal and it's purely to advance the deal. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you do want the script, feel free, go down to the description. You can click on that, learn the exact script that we use. It is fantastic. Thank you for watching this video. We'll see you in the next lesson.